In 2243, humanity had reached a new era of exploration, and discovery the stars beckoned with promises of untold riches and secrets. But deep beneath the ocean's surface, another mystery awaited, one that could change the course of history. Earth's governments had sent expeditions into the seas for centuries, but what lay hidden in the depths was beyond their wildest imagination. Captain Sarah Mallory stood at the helm of the Titan, an advanced experimental submarine, tasked with retrieving a strange alien artifact that had been discovered on the ocean floor, an artifact thought to be linked to an ancient and unknown civilization. Its origins were a mystery and its potential a threat to every living being on Earth. The mission was supposed to be simple, a covert operation under the radar. No one was meant to know about it, but things didn't stay simple for long. The Titan glided through the deep blue of the ocean's vast expanse, its sleek black form cutting through the water with eerie silence. The crew was tense, but confident they had everything they needed. And more, their technology was the most advanced in the world, from the sonar systems capable of mapping entire ocean floors to the weapons hidden within the submarine's hull, designed for both defense and offense. Captain Mallory paced the bridge, her mind running through the mission parameters one more time. Every decision had to be perfect. Nothing could go wrong, not with what they were up against. But even as she thought this, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Outside the submarine, the ocean was alive with unknown creatures. The dark abyss was their home. But Mallory wasn't concerned with them. Her attention was on the mission, on the artifact that lay somewhere in the darkness ahead. Her orders were clear: recover the artifact and return to the surface before anyone even knew they were there. The waters were deep here, far deeper than most human vessels could navigate, and in the quiet of the depths it felt like the Titan was the only thing alive. But as they ventured further into the abyss, strange readings began to appear on the submarine scanners, faint at first, but unmistakable. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, but said nothing. Their instruments were notoriously sensitive, and sometimes they picked up anomalies from the underwater currents or even from the magnetic fields around the ship. But this felt different. Mallory ordered the crew to keep their stations and monitor the readings. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as the readings grew stronger and more persistent. "Captain, we're picking up something on sonar. It's not natural," Lieutenant Marshall said, his voice tight with suspicion. "Something's out there." Mallory's heart skipped a beat. She studied the screen as the blip on the sonar grew larger. It wasn't an oceanic creature. It wasn't a ship either. The shape was wrong, too angular, too precise. It was far too large to be anything they'd encountered before. The Titan's engines hummed quietly as Mallory ordered the crew to keep their course and continue their search for the artifact. But deep down she knew that whatever it was out there, it wasn't something they could ignore. She stared at the dark waters outside the thick glass of the viewing windows, trying to make sense of the strange sensation that washed over her. The Titan had descended into one of the most remote places on Earth, and yet they were being watched. Something was coming for them. A deep rumble echoed through the hull, and then the first tremor hit the Titan, as if something massive had stirred from its slumber deep below the ocean's surface. And now it was awake. The rumble shook the Titan again, sending a wave of unease through the crew. Alarms began to blare as the pressure sensors detected a massive shift in the water outside. Something was moving fast, and it was big. Lieutenant Marshall's eyes went wide as the sonar blip on his screen grew larger by the second. "Captain, it's coming straight for us," Marshall said, his voice tense. His fingers hovered over the controls, ready to take action, but unsure of what to do. Mallory's instincts kicked in. Her mind raced through every possible scenario. This wasn't an ordinary sea creature or an underwater earthquake. Something was coming for them, something with purpose. She glanced at the other crew members, their faces a mix of anxiety and confusion. None of them had ever seen anything like this before. The ocean was full of mysteries, but nothing this unnatural. "Shut down the engines," Mallory ordered, her voice calm but firm. "Cut all power, and let's go silent. We don't want to draw attention." The crew worked quickly, following her orders. The Titan's engines quieted, and the submarine coasted through the deep water, now nearly completely still. The tension in the cabin was palpable as every crew member waited for the next move. Whatever it was out there in the dark, it was far more intelligent than they had imagined. For several long minutes, the Titan remained eerily silent in the depths, but the crew couldn't relax, not with the growing sense of dread pressing in around them. Mallory knew something was wrong, but what she didn't know was whether they had already been detected, or if they were still undetected, and at the mercy of whatever was hunting them. The sonar pinged again, louder this time. It was a massive signal, not just one entity, but multiple. The crew exchanged confused glances. What could possibly be big enough to create such a disturbance down here? Suddenly the Titan shook once more, but this time it was more violent, a low-frequency pulse that seemed to reverberate through the entire submarine like a giant fist had slammed into the water outside. A powerful jolt rocked the vessel, sending some crew members stumbling. Mallory gripped the edge of her chair as the submarine tilted and rolled with the force. "Captain, the hull's been breached," Engineer O'Reilly shouted from the back of the control room. "We've got a leak in the aft section, water's flooding in." "Seal it off," Mallory barked. "Get us stabilized now." O'Reilly worked quickly, trying to close off the compartments and prevent the flooding from spreading, but the damage was done. The Titan was no longer in peak condition. It had been compromised, and Mallory's stomach sank as she realized just how vulnerable they were out here. Another violent shake rocked the submarine, and this time Mallory felt it in her bones. Something was closing in on them at incredible speed. The hum of the ship's emergency power system buzzed in the background, but it did little to quell the rising panic that was creeping into the hearts of the crew. "We need to move," Mallory said through gritted teeth. "Now." But before she could give the order to move, the lights flickered briefly, and then the unmistakable sound of something massive moving just outside the hull echoed through the Titan, like the groan of a predator closing in on its prey. It was too late. The Titan was already within range. Whatever had been hunting them had found them first. Suddenly, the massive form of an alien warship appeared outside their viewing windows, its sheer size dwarfing the submarine by comparison. The ship's surface glistened with strange materials and glowing lights. The hull was adorned with strange alien symbols and markings that none of the crew recognized. The enormous craft hovered ominously just beyond the reach of the Titan, its presence overwhelming the very water around them. Captain Mallory's heart raced as she stared at the ship, her mind scrambling to make sense of it all. It was no ordinary alien craft. This was a warship, a massive, terrifying vessel that had been hiding in the depths of the ocean for who knows how long, and now it had found them. The alien warship loomed outside the Titan's windows, a dark behemoth, its hull glinting ominously in the dim light filtering through the deep ocean waters. Mallory's pulse quickened as her crew froze, staring at the massive craft in disbelief. The Zorak warship was unlike anything they had ever seen. Its sleek, angular design was a perfect blend of form and function, sharp edges glimmering with an eerie glow. It seemed to pulse with an energy of its own, as though it were alive, watching them, waiting. "Captain," Marshall whispered, his voice tight with a mix of awe and fear, "is this an invasion?" Mallory's mind raced. The Titan was supposed to be in a covered location, far away from any possible threats. But this was no coincidence. The Zorak warship had been waiting, hiding deep below the surface, and now it had found them. She didn't need to say a word to her crew. They all knew what was coming. The Titan was no longer on a mission to retrieve an artifact. It was fighting for survival. "Get us moving," Mallory ordered, her voice steady despite the fear creeping in. "Evasive maneuvers, now." The Titan lurched into action as O'Reilly scrambled to reroute power to the engines. The submarine's massive form surged forward, cutting through the water as it tried to escape the shadow of the warship. But the alien vessel was fast, too fast. It moved with a fluid grace, almost as if it was anticipating their every move. Every time the Titan tried to change course, the warship shifted with them, maintaining its position just out of reach. "Captain, they're tracking us," Marshall said, his fingers flying over the console. "We can't shake them. Their sensors are too advanced." Mallory's mind raced. They couldn't outrun the warship, and the Titan's weapons, though powerful, were no match for a ship of that size and power. They had no choice but to face it head-on. She ordered O'Reilly to prepare the torpedoes, but even as she spoke, her gut told her it wouldn't be enough. As if on cue, the warship shifted position, its massive form filling the viewports. A low hum filled the cabin, a sound so deep it seemed to reverberate through their bones. The lights flickered, and then, without warning, the alien ship opened fire. Energy beams lanced through the water with incredible speed, cutting through the ocean like a knife. The first blast hit the Titan's hull with a deafening roar. The submarine shuddered violently, sending a shockwave through the crew. The lights dimmed, and the alarms blared, but there was no time to react. The ship's shields flared up, but it wasn't enough. The second blast hit, and this time, the Titan buckled under the pressure, its systems flickering in and out of operation. "Damage report," Mallory shouted, gripping the console as the submarine reeled from the impact. "We've lost primary power," O'Reilly responded quickly, his voice tense. "Engines are offline. Hull integrity at 70%. We're taking on water in the aft sections." Mallory's heart pounded in her chest. The Titan was crippled, its advanced technology unable to withstand the full force of the alien warship's firepower. They couldn't take another hit, but there was no escaping. The warship was closing in, and they were running out of options. "We have to fight back," Mallory said, her voice steely with determination. "Prepare the EMP cannon. We need to disable their systems. We don't know if it'll work on a ship like that," Marshall said, his voice hesitant. "I don't care," Mallory snapped. "We don't have time for doubt. Fire the EMP when ready." The crew scrambled, their movements frantic as they worked to load and aim the cannon. The warship loomed closer, its ominous silhouette now taking up the entire viewport. It was readying another strike, and Mallory knew they didn't have much time left. "Firing EMP in 3, 2, 1. Marshall's voice was cut off by a loud boom as the EMP cannon discharged, sending a pulse of energy racing toward the alien warship. The pulse collided with the Zorak ship's shields, causing them to flicker and spark. For a moment, it seemed like the cannon might have worked, but then the shields flared back to full strength, and the warship continued its relentless advance. The Titan had failed, and now it seemed like the crew's only chance was to survive long enough to escape. But deep down, Mallory knew that escaping wasn't going to be easy, or possible at all. The Titan groaned under the stress, its frame rattling as the alien warship closed in with terrifying precision. Mallory gripped the controls, her knuckles white, as she tried to steer the crippled submarine away from another incoming barrage. The EMP cannon had done little more than make the alien ship flinch. The Zorak warship, with its superior technology, was still completely operational, its weapon systems primed for another devastating strike. "Captain, we're losing pressure in the aft compartments," O'Reilly shouted, sweat dripping down his forehead. "We've got minutes before the entire hull collapses." Mallory's eyes flicked over the damage reports as they flashed across the screen. The Titan was a marvel of human engineering, but it wasn't built to withstand this kind of assault. Even with the best technology Earth had to offer, they were no match for an enemy this powerful. Her mind raced for a solution, but it felt like there was no way out. Suddenly, something sparked in the back of her mind. She remembered the experimental weapon they had been testing on board, the one they hadn't even intended to use. The Fist of Humanity, an untested, high-energy projectile designed to release a concentrated burst of power. If it worked, it could pierce any shield, any hull, and do catastrophic damage. If it didn't work, they would be lost anyway. It was their last chance. "Prepare the Fist of Humanity," Mallory ordered, her voice a calm undercurrent to the chaos around her. "Captain, are you sure?" Marshall asked, looking at her with wide eyes. "We've never tested it in combat. We don't even know if it will work." Mallory's gaze hardened. "We don't have a choice. If we don't stop that ship, we won't make it out of here." The crew moved with urgency, preparing the weapon with swift efficiency. The Titan system began to hum as power surged through the circuits, charging the massive energy weapon. But as the weapon powered up, the alien warship didn't hesitate. It fired once more, and this time, the beam was stronger than ever. The Titan shook violently as the energy blast struck its hull, sending an agonizing screech of metal reverberating throughout the vessel. Lights flickered, and the entire submarine tilted to one side. The crew was thrown from their seats, but they quickly regained their positions, adrenaline overriding the pain. "Damage report," Mallory shouted. "We're losing power to the secondary systems," O'Reilly replied, his voice tight. "We've only got a few minutes before we lose everything." Mallory locked eyes with him. "We have to make this count. Ready the fist. Now." O'Reilly nodded and began to make the final adjustments, his fingers flying over the console. The weapon was ready. Mallory gave a single nod, signaling Marshall to prepare to fire. Outside the submarine, the Zorak warship hovered menacingly, its weapons primed for another attack. The crew braced for the worst, but Mallory's gaze was unwavering. The fist of humanity was their last hope. The tension in the control room was unbearable as the seconds stretched into what felt like hours. The warship's guns glowed with deadly intent, its systems preparing for the killing blow. "Firing fist of humanity," Marshall called, his voice filled with a mix of hope and desperation. A brilliant flash erupted from the Titan as the weapon discharged, a concentrated beam of energy streaking through the water toward the massive warship. The beam collided with the Zorak vessel's shields, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deafening crack, the shields flickered and failed, the energy beam cutting straight through. The Zorak warship shuddered violently, and a massive explosion tore through its hull. Mallory held her breath as the alien warship began to list, its energy systems failing, its lights flickering. The crew watched in stunned silence as the warship's massive form started to break apart under the strain. It was happening. They were actually winning. But then the Zorak commander, from within the damaged warship, activated the emergency protocols. The warship began to move erratically, sparks flying from the control panels. A low rumble shook the ocean around them. "Captain!" Marshall yelled, his voice rising in alarm. "It's going into self-destruct. We need to get out of here now." Mallory's heart skipped a beat. The alien vessel was going to explode, and if they didn't escape in time, the Titan would be caught in the blast. "Full reverse," Mallory ordered, her voice steely. "Get us out of here. Now." O'Reilly slammed his hands down on the console, desperately trying to get the engines to fire. The Titan's damaged systems sputtered to life, the submarine lurching forward in an attempt to escape the deadly blast zone. But the ocean's deep currents slowed their progress, the countdown to destruction ticking away faster than they could move. The alien warship's final moments were a spectacle of fire and energy. Its hull cracked open, a massive shockwave rippling through the water, tearing apart everything in its path. "Hold on," Mallory shouted, bracing herself as the Titan shot forward, narrowly avoiding the deadly explosion as it consumed the alien warship in a flash of blinding light. The Titan was thrown back by the force of the blast, but somehow, against all odds, it survived. The crew gasped for breath, their hearts racing as they looked at the wreckage of the Zorak warship. They had done it. Against all odds, they had won. But as the silence settled over the ocean once more, Mallory knew this victory was only the beginning. The Zorak Empire would not rest. The Titan floated in the eerie stillness of the ocean, its hull battered and scarred from the fierce battle with the Zorak warship. Captain Mallory gripped the helm, her mind still racing, her body tense from the adrenaline that coursed through her veins. The wreckage of the alien warship floated nearby, massive fragments drifting like debris in the aftermath of the explosion. The force of the blast had left a shockwave that rattled the Titan, but somehow, the submarine had endured. For now. "Status report," Mallory commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos that still churned in her chest. "We've stabilized the core," O'Reilly said, his voice grim but relieved. "The leaks are sealed. We're not sinking, but we're running on auxiliary power. Our engines are shot." Marshall's hands flew over the console, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Sonar is back online. But, Captain, there's something else. We've got another energy signature on the move." Mallory's eyes narrowed. "Another ship? What kind of signature?" "It's hard to tell," Marshall said, adjusting the sonar readings. "But it's massive. It looks like it's coming from deeper within the trench." Mallory's stomach dropped. The Zorak warship's self-destruct had been their last hope of escaping, but now it seemed like their enemies were not done. She tried to suppress the surge of dread that crawled up her spine. This was no coincidence. Whatever had been lurking beneath the ocean for centuries wasn't finished with them yet. "Activate all remaining systems," Mallory ordered. "Prepare to move out. We're not waiting for them to come to us." The crew sprang into action, O'Reilly working to reroute power, while Marshall kept his eyes fixed on the growing energy signature. Time was running out. The Titan had barely survived its first encounter, and now it seemed like the battle was far from over. Mallory's thoughts raced. They had been sent to retrieve an artifact, something that was supposed to be hidden away in this vast and forgotten place. But the Zorak Empire had been waiting, and whatever they had been guarding wasn't just a relic. It was a key to something bigger, something much more dangerous. "Captain, the energy signature is getting closer," Marshall said urgently. "It's moving fast." Mallory's instincts screamed at her. They were being hunted. "Full reverse now," she ordered. The Titan began to retreat, its damaged engines groaning under the strain. But the submarine was slow, too slow. The warship that had emerged from the wreckage of the Zorak vessel was fast, and it was gaining ground. Mallory's mind raced as she weighed her options. They had no more weapons. Their EMP cannon was drained. The Titan was barely functional. But the artifact, the reason they were down here, it had to be something more than just a simple object. The Zorak wouldn't have hidden a ship of that size just to protect a piece of ancient technology. There was a larger threat, a deeper conspiracy at play. They weren't just guarding the artifact. They were trying to keep humanity from discovering what it truly was. "Prepare the escape pod," Mallory said, making the call she hoped she wouldn't have to. "We need to get the artifact back to the surface. It's our only way out." O'Reilly hesitated. "Captain, the pod's not designed for this kind of depth. We'd never make it. And even if we did, the warship will follow." "We don't have a choice," Mallory replied, her voice hard. "If we stay here, we're dead." As the crew worked to prep the escape pod, the enemy warship drew closer, its silhouette becoming clearer through the dark waters. It was even larger than the first ship, its design more intricate, more menacing. Mallory knew that there was no chance they would survive if they fought again. But there was one thing they could still do: the artifact. It was the key. If they could get it back to the surface, they could unlock its secrets. And maybe, just maybe, they could turn the tide of the war that had just begun. The crew was almost ready. The escape pod was prepped, but it felt like they were on borrowed time. Mallory took one last glance at the screens, seeing the warship closing in faster than they could outrun. With a determined breath, she gave the order. "Launch the pod. Get us out of here." As the pod detached from the Titan, Mallory's heart pounded in her chest. They had one shot, one chance to escape. The Titan would go down with the enemy's assault, but if the crew could survive, they could return to Earth with the key to humanity's future. It was the only hope they had left. The escape pod shot into the abyss, the Titan's final moments fading behind them as the small vessel rocketed toward the surface. Captain Mallory held on tightly, her eyes glued to the tiny monitors that flickered as they navigated through the darkness. The pod was built for speed and stealth, but it was fragile, vulnerable, and even with their best efforts, it couldn't outrun the looming threat of the Zorak warship. "Pod engines are holding steady," O'Reilly reported, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in the air. But I don't know how long we can stay ahead of them. That warship is closing in fast." Mallory didn't answer immediately. Her mind was focused on one thing, the artifact. The key to everything. If they could get it back to the surface, they could potentially shift the balance of power between Earth and the Zorak Empire. But the deeper they descended, the more they realized that the stakes were far higher than they had initially imagined. The Zorak weren't just trying to hide the artifact. They were protecting something much more significant, something that could change the fate of the entire galaxy. The sensors beeped as they neared the surface, but a low rumble from behind them sent a jolt of panic through Mallory's chest. She turned to the crew, her voice calm but urgent. "Activate the decoys. We need to confuse their sensors. Do it now." Marshall slammed a button, activating the decoy systems, which sent out a barrage of false signals designed to mislead the enemy ship's tracking systems. They were counting on the hope that the warship, so heavily reliant on its advanced technology, would fall for the trick. The pod surged forward with newfound speed, the water around them distorting as the decoys began their interference. But just as Mallory felt a glimmer of hope, another vibration rippled through the pod. It wasn't from the decoys. It was from the warship. The energy signature from behind them grew stronger, a sudden surge that reverberated through the water and rattled the pod's frame. The Zorak had seen through their deception. They were too close. "Get us out of this trench," Mallory barked. "Increase speed." The narrow passage they had been using to escape, a deep underwater canyon, was quickly becoming their tomb. There was no way to outrun the warship in a straight line. Every time the decoys created a small gap, the warship closed it faster. The warship's sleek form was like a shadow, always there, always looming just beyond the next turn. "Hold tight," Mallory shouted, her eyes narrowing as she pushed the pod's controls to the limit. The pod shot forward, dodging jagged rocks and narrow canyon walls, barely squeezing through some of the tighter spaces. Behind them, the Zorak warship wasn't slowing down. It was relentless. Mallory could feel the pressure mounting, her heart pounding in her chest. They couldn't keep this up for long. Every maneuver, every turn, pushed the pod closer to its limits. Another pulse of energy vibrated through the water, and this time it was accompanied by a series of sharp, echoing sounds. The warship had launched something. Drones, hundreds of them, smaller than the main vessel but just as deadly, spread out in a grid pattern, circling the escape pod like sharks. The pod systems began to scream with alerts as the drone's weapons locked onto them. "Incoming," Marshall shouted, barely able to hold onto his console as the pod jerked from side to side. "They're targeting us." Mallory slammed her fist onto the control panel, activating the pod's emergency thrusters. The pod lurched forward, narrowly dodging the barrage of beams that were sent toward them. The drones were closing in, and the sheer number of them made evasion impossible. "We need to separate the pod from the drones," Mallory muttered, her mind working in overdrive. Her hands danced over the controls, activating the pod's last resort defensive measure, a cloaking field that would render the pod invisible to the drones for a short time. But the field could only last a few minutes, and the warship was still closing in. "Get ready," Mallory warned as the cloaking field flickered into life. The water around them began to distort, and the once clear sonar readings were scrambled as the pod became nearly invisible to the drones. For a brief moment, they were undetected, but Mallory knew it wouldn't last. The warship would recalibrate, and the drones would begin searching again. "We're almost there," she said, her voice determined, but the weight of her words hung heavy. The surface was close, so close, but they still had to survive long enough to reach it. The pod surged through the water like a bullet, the ocean's pressure pressing against them as they fought their way toward safety. But the sound of the warship's pursuit echoed in the distance, a constant reminder that the Zorak were relentless, and that their fight was far from over. "We've got a few minutes at best," Mallory said, glancing at her crew. "Hold on. We're not out yet." The escape pod rocketed toward the surface, the faint light of the outside world beginning to pierce the depths. But the warship wasn't far behind. The next chapter of humanity's struggle against the Zorak Empire had only just begun. The escape pod burst through the surface of the water with a violent splash, sending droplets in every direction. Mallory's breath caught in her throat as the pod breached the ocean, the dark expanse of the sea now behind them. The cold air hit their faces, and for a moment, it felt like they had escaped the nightmare. But Mallory knew better. The Zorak warship had no reason to stop. They weren't safe yet. "Activate the distress beacon," Mallory ordered, her voice sharp as she turned to Marshall. "We need to call for help. Now." Marshall nodded, quickly setting the beacon to transmit their position. The signal would send out a distress call to any Allied forces in the area. But Mallory wasn't optimistic. They were deep in uncharted waters, and it would take time for any response to come. They had no guarantee that anyone would hear them before the Zorak arrived. "Distress signal sent," Marshall said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "Now we wait." The surface of the water was eerily calm, the vastness of the ocean stretching endlessly in every direction. Mallory's heart pounded in her chest. They had made it to the surface, but the warship was still out there, and it was only a matter of time before it caught up with them. The pod systems were intact for now, but they were running low on power, and the Zorak ship's ability to track them was unparalleled. O'Reilly turned toward Mallory. "We can't keep running. We need to figure out a way to fight back. That warship will destroy us if we don't have a plan." Mallory nodded, considering their options. They had no weapons left, no torpedoes, no EMPs. The pod was little more than a lifeboat, a fragile shell against a force that had already proven its ability to annihilate anything in its path. They were surrounded by nothing but ocean, with no land in sight, and a warship that could obliterate them at any moment. "We need to buy time," Mallory said, a plan beginning to form in her mind. "The artifact. It's the key. We don't know what it is, but it's the reason the Zorak are after us. We need to analyze it. It could be our only leverage." Marshall, ever the skeptic, frowned. "We don't have the equipment to study it here, Captain. If we don't get help soon, we'll be sitting ducks." Mallory's gaze hardened. "We don't have a choice. We study it here, now, and figure out how to use it to our advantage. If we can understand what the Zorak were trying to protect, maybe we'll find a way to turn the tables." She motioned to the small compartment where the artifact had been carefully secured. It was a strange, crystalline object that hummed with an unnatural energy, a silent reminder of the immense power it might hold. They had no idea what it could do, only that the Zorak were willing to go to extreme lengths to keep it hidden. O'Reilly began to work on setting up the pod's rudimentary analysis equipment. The pod wasn't designed for detailed scientific research, but it would have to do for now. As the crew worked, Mallory's mind raced. They had to find something, anything, that could turn the tide in their favor. Suddenly, the pod's sensors flickered to life, alerting them to a massive presence. Mallory's heart skipped a beat. The Zorak warship was closing in. "Brace yourselves," Mallory shouted. "It's here." The crew rushed to their positions as the warship's silhouette appeared on the horizon, dark and menacing against the backdrop of the open sea. The massive ship had emerged from the depths, its engines powered and ready for another strike. "Full power to the engines," Mallory ordered. "We're not going down without a fight." The pod lurched forward, its engines roaring to life as it sped away from the oncoming warship. But the Zorak ship was relentless, faster than they could ever hope to be. Marshall's voice cracked through the tension. "Captain, we're not outrunning them. They'll catch us before we can make it to the safety zone." Mallory's mind raced. The distress signal had gone out, but help wouldn't reach them in time. The artifact was their only hope, but they still didn't know how to use it. The warship was closing in, its weapons systems primed. A sudden thought struck her. Maybe the artifact wasn't just a key to something bigger. Maybe it was a weapon. "Marshall," Mallory said, her voice urgent. Can you interface with the artifact? Can you link it to the pod systems? Marshall looked at her, confused. Are you serious? We have no idea what it's capable of. We don't even know what it does. I don't care, Mallory replied, her gaze unwavering. Do it. We need every advantage we can get. Marshall hesitated for a heartbeat before turning back to the artifact. He connected it to the pod's console, his fingers moving quickly over the controls. The artifact pulsed with energy, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then, a deep hum filled the pod, and the screens flickered as strange symbols appeared, far beyond any human technology. The warship's energy signature loomed closer, but as the artifact's power surged, something strange happened. The Zorak ship's sensors began to glitch. Its tracking systems faltered. The entire warship seemed to shudder. Mallory's eyes widened. It's working. Whatever it is, it's interfering with their systems. For the first time, they had a chance. If they could keep the artifact's power flowing, they might just have a fighting chance to survive. The Zorak warship's pursuit had hit an obstacle, and they needed to press every advantage before it was too late. The hum of the artifact grew louder, resonating with a strange, powerful energy that pulsed through the pod systems. Mallory's heart raced as she watched the Zorak warship's sensors begin to flicker and glitch, its once sleek profile now distorted on their monitors. For the first time since the Titan had been disabled, she saw a glimmer of hope. The artifact was working. Somehow, it was disrupting the warship's advanced tracking and targeting systems. Keep it going, Marshall, Mallory ordered, her voice taut with determination. We have to keep the pressure on them. Marshall nodded, his fingers flying over the controls as he tapped into the pod's limited systems, trying to maintain the link between the artifact and the pod's command center. The glow of the artifact intensified, and for a brief moment, the whole pod seemed to hum with the energy emanating from it. We've got a few seconds before they adapt to this, Marshall said, his voice strained. I can't hold them off forever. We need to strike now, or they'll recover. Mallory's mind raced. She couldn't risk waiting for help. The warship was getting closer by the second, its engines roaring with menace as it began to close in on them. She glanced at the horizon, knowing that the nearest human forces were too far away to intervene in time. If they didn't do something drastic, they wouldn't survive this. Can you target their weak spots? Mallory asked, her eyes fixed on the warship's steadily approaching silhouette. Marshall looked at her, uncertainty flashing across his face. I might be able to. The artifact's energy is throwing off their sensors, but I need to focus it into a concentrated beam. It's risky. We don't know how the warship's shields will react. But Mallory didn't have the luxury of hesitation. Do it. We've got no choice. O'Reilly, sensing the urgency, rushed to assist Marshall, and together they worked quickly, aligning the artifact's power with the pod's targeting systems. The warship loomed ever closer, its massive silhouette now filling the viewports, its weapons primed for the kill. Mallory's mind was focused, cutting through the noise of the moment. Firing in 3, 2, 1. Marshall's voice broke through the tension, his hand slamming the final button. A brilliant, concentrated beam of light erupted from the artifact, racing toward the warship with breathtaking speed. The pulse of energy struck the warship's shields, and for a brief moment, it seemed like nothing would happen. Then the shields flickered violently, crackling as if struggling against the sheer power of the beam. Mallory held her breath. And then, crack. The shields shattered in a brilliant explosion of light, and the beam continued, striking the warship directly in its hull. The warship lurched, and for a split second, the entire ocean seemed to tremble as the ship's systems began to fail. Smoke and sparks erupted from its outer hull, and the massive vessel began to list, its engines sputtering. They're losing power, Marshall said, his voice filled with awe. The blast hit their core systems. It's overloading. Mallory's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't let up. Target the engines. If we disable them, they won't be able to chase us down. O'Reilly quickly recalibrated the pod systems, locking onto the warship's engine array. A second pulse of energy from the artifact lanced through the water, striking the core of the Zorak warship's engines. The blast rocked the ship, sending another wave of destruction through its structure. The warship's engines sputtered, then completely failed, the great behemoth slowing to a halt as it began to drift aimlessly in the water. "We did it," Marshall said, breathless. "The warship is disabled." For a moment, the world was still. The warship, now a hulking mass of smoking wreckage, drifted in the water, no longer a threat. Mallory felt a sense of disbelief wash over her. They had done the impossible. They had taken down a ship that was far beyond their capabilities, with only a fragile escape pod and a mysterious artifact. But Mallory's relief was short-lived. They were far from out of danger. The artifact had done its job, but they were still stranded in the middle of the ocean with no way to get back to civilization. They had no way of knowing if the Zorak had reinforcements on the way, or if this was only the beginning of a much larger conflict. Mallory looked at her crew, their faces a mix of exhaustion and hope. "We're not done yet. We've won this round, but we need to get back to Earth with this artifact. We need to know what it really is." O'Reilly nodded grimly. "We'll need to figure out how to power up the pod for a longer journey. But if the artifact can do that to a Zorak warship, it might be the key to winning this war." Marshall added, "We still don't know the full extent of what it can do, Captain, but we have to find out." Mallory's eyes fixed on the artifact, its energy still crackling, its true potential unknown. It was the key to something far greater, something that could change the course of the galaxy. But the real battle was just beginning. "We'll make it back," Mallory said firmly, a new resolve settling in her chest. "We have to."